Cheers.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, so Greg is the meatwad of this group. Okay, we've established that. I ain't taking a shower in more than 3 weeks.
Wait, hold up. Hold
See
up.
you later.
Does that make, God damn it, does that make me Master Shake?
Yep.
Me or yeah, you're
Yes.
Master Shake.
Yes,
Come
you're
Frylock, yeah.
Yes, you are Master
Oh,
Shake.
that hurts.
Yes. Yes, he
That hurt a
is.
little bit.
Everybody. Yes.
TSG Radio back on the air. Season 3. Well, if we really officially had seasons, which we kind of do and we kind of don't. And in this case, we had to, take a little layoff, take a little hiatus, kind of catch up with our summertime plans and, drinking and hanging out and seeing our families and all that stuff. But we are back. We are here. We are alive. We are well, and we are in the steam tunnels. We are back down here to bring you all of what we need to know here in America. And I'm here today again. We are here. We are in America, and America again on the precipice, on the crux. And I am here to bring that out into the light. Yes, we may think it's about treason. We may think it's about documents, but no, I am here to tell you that we're facing a crisis, people.
Oh, we're really going for it, huh?
We are facing a crisis because apparently black actors can now play elves, and that is just unsettling now. That's really just upsetting American culture. We are out there, and yes, this is happening. This is happening right now. And I'm going to go to my man on the street, 3 of clubs, RaShaun Smith, to get his commentary.
What did it do? How did you do? I did none of those things you talked about and what we were doing the hiatus, but it's nice to see everyone anyway. And I was under the impression that elves were of many hues, but fuck me and my video game playing mine. So whatever.
Apparently, according to some of the shit I read last night on the interwebs, you're wrong, son. You're wrong. That's a betrayal. That's a betrayal of the source material, which I actually got from no less. Actually, that was specifically from the Little Mermaid. I was, there were people lecturing on the source material of the Little Mermaid, and how Ariel, who isn't even the original name of the Little Mermaid, mind you, was, there were all kinds of reasons given from the pseudoscientific to the amount of sun exposure one would get under the ocean, of course, leaving out, oceanic pressure and breathing underwater, as well as a mythical creature. Just setting all of that aside, apparently that was, disrespectful.
I think we have our next episode.
There is that, but
yeah, how the Germans write some fucking kooky shit, huh? I mean, they were out there with the fairy tales.
Hell yeah!
Talk about fermentation.
Hey, this was one of those fairy tales where I don't even think a child was actually devoured in a meat pie. So they were coming out. This was considered one of the nicer fairy tales. All right.
If I remember correctly, it does not actually end happy ever after, though. It ends slightly brutally, which again, bravo Germans with the kid fairy tales. You guys are on a mission, and you're there to actually set out and get it. I'm with you.
I'll mansplain. It's the Dutch, but
oh, my bad.
They're like German adjacent, literally, unfortunately, in that time of World War II. That was a little unfortunate how adjacent they were. But okay, the language very similar, Dutch and German.
Considering we have people in our country right now that are kind of cool with those Germans, I'm not sure where we stand on pointing fingers. I would point out that I would love to maybe use like a foam Nerf bat so no one has to die. But take all these individuals, lock them in a room, and forget about the trigger point details like color of skin of a fictional character. I mean, that they've never actually seen or could prove or actually define, but have them actually describe what, like in this case, a mermaid is, and just see who comes out of the room. Because even if you let, like, let's say 30 people in a room and say, just describe what a mermaid is, you're not going to get the actual same opinion or the majority. And that's the whole point, is everyone gets so caught up in their point of views and opinions that they totally forget the person to their left or right may have a different point of view. So what's the fucking point?
Well, with that, let's get that different point of view. Let's go back to studio now with the Star Child reporting on this crisis in America. Black Elves. Can we get some words of wisdom from you there, Star Child?
America, the white anchor put the black guy on the street. I just want to point that out.
The what?
The white anchor put the black guy on the street. It's kind of messed up.
We got a spare. That's the beauty of our dynamic. I'm motherfucker can stay out there. Shit.
It's like the Key and Peele spit with the black ice. I was walking back to my car the other day, and black ice just crept up on me and made me slip and almost took my purse. Okay.
Yeah. What was it? Black elves, black dwarves,
black mermaids.
Black mermaids.
I mean, it's
the pandemic.
Totally fine. Here's my problem, though. Yeah, I mean, like, are they black? Are they really? Like, you in a black store, you black, but you in there, but you know what I mean? Like, what real blackisms are you bringing? Like, if they're gonna have a black mermaid, here's what I want them to do. The whole thing's got to be just, the whole soundtrack's got to be just soca and reggae. The whole soundtrack has got to be not like that fucking bubbly calypso they had in the cartoon version. No, I mean some
Under the Sea was calypso. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, fuck out of here. No, that wasn't real calypso. I'm talking about some good soca, make that shit Caribbean as hell. Like, I want the whole thing to just look like Caribbean Fest Harlem. Like, just do that shit. Like, that's what I would love. Like, if you're gonna make it black as fuck. You know, like, so if you're gonna have like black elves, they have to start eating meat, because I know the elves don't eat meat. So
don't believe that shit. That's a stereotype.
Black people, like, you gotta start eating meat. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's and first of all, like, right off of the bat, like the black dwarves, I was kind of looking forward to that. Like, I was really looking. Actually, the Black Dwarves is what made, because I wasn't gonna watch it because it's not based on the prequel of the Lord of the Rings like it should be. So I kind of lost interest. But when I heard the dwarves were gonna be black, I was like, shit, the dwarves already know how to party.
What was the bond that took place?
Dwarves are gonna set that shit off.
I mean, when it comes to the whole source material argument, I'm putting big bunny quotes on the argument there. We can start with the pointy ears were not really a part of the Tolkien thing. Now, when I was out LARPing, yes, because I did that. We've already known that. You know, that's out. I'm not a closeted LARPer. I don't do it anymore. But I was never really closeted about it. There you go.
I was gonna say,
to quote Bender from John Bender from Breakfast Club, demented and sad, but social. We definitely wore the ears. And something I was thinking about, though, of course, with this introduction of actually, opening up casting a little bit more, and maybe giving a guy a break who could use it and get an acting role and not be like, oh no, we're casting for elves. We had we absconded with the TSR idea of dark elves, who were dark-skinned elves with white hair and all that, and they looked kind of goth and chic and all that. Looking back on it, okay, I never happened to play one, but boy, I would probably be really embarrassed if a picture of that had come out at some point. We were not exactly we weren't thinking, of the sensitivity there of what we might be putting across. That was not the idea that we were going for, but
yeah, but counterpoint, then you're going to have to unpack and unravel a lot in fantasy. Like, for example, why is all white magic the good magic, the magic that heals you and propels you and protects you and all that? And black magic is the destructive one, the killer, the evil, the one you don't go to, the side that, if there is, white and black, that's where all the bad things happen. I mean, it can go a lot of directions in that way. Some of it is, of course, pejorative. Some of it is just general ways that people explain things back then that we're looking at it from a modern lens, and it just doesn't fit no matter how we look at it, other than, and here's the fun part for everyone, because this is the universal umbrella in which it's under, fantasy fiction. It's not real. It can be made up 1,000 different ways, and guess what? Once you do that, you have 1,001 more, and you can keep going, because it's not actually rooted in any fact. It can be whatever it wants. My question, though, was, what was the Bond that took place in the Caribbean?
The bomb?
The Bond, James Bond.
Live and Let Die.
Yeah.
Live and Let Die?
Yeah.
Yeah, to Greg's point, the Calypso in Little Mermaid, the Disney movie, was the Calypso that you get from people who made Live and Let Die.
As you said on that episode, I'm calling back to our episode. We've reached to that point. Hey, my daughter got her hair braided. You said,
I heard steel drums.
I heard steel drums. Yeah, I just want to say, in our hiatus, nothing much has changed. We are right back to where we left off. Absolutely. You can see we can take a couple weeks off, kick it back, and we still got this shit. We are absolutely on it. Well, since we're on the subject of fantasy, I wanted to bring us back to what brought us here together today.
This wasn't it?
This was not it. And I'm going to take the blame on that. I was really going for the racist fanboys, the toxic fans out there that, was just trying to take an opportunity to take a shit on them because they deserve that.
We're not going to talk about them because we know what they're about.
Like, we know that. Yeah, without a doubt. So I'll take the blame on that one. I'll take the blame on the rabbit hole, putting the rabbit hole out there and throwing everybody down it. That's my fault. That's my bad. But I will point us back up to the light here for a moment, that since we were talking about fantasy and, back in a time when fantasy existed before Twitter, before chat rooms, before Reddit, before all this bullshit, what was it that kept us entertained? What was it that, fired up our imaginations back when the budgets were low and it was still a big
Sadly,
risk.
not all of them.
Yeah, some of them when the budgets were quite high and they just looked low.
Too high.
But what was it that kept our imaginations fired up? What was it that gave us that idea? We all know, a lot of what started it off is particularly in the 70s, but we kind of want to take a look at those other things that kept our imaginations fired up and, gave us a reason to be excited to go to the movie theater. Especially when we were still kids. So some of these movies have gone, and movies, television shows, and what have you, have certainly gone into obscurity. Would be the best way to look at it. Would be the kindest way, I think, to put it in some cases. Mm-hmm. But Greg was the one who wanted to sort of start talking about that first golden age of fantasy. So, Star Child, we want to give you your 10 minutes of fame here and get us started off here. Tell us a little bit about that subject there and about what you were thinking about today.
Well, it hit me because I was like, someone said that, the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies began the age of fantasy. And I was like, nah, man, because we wouldn't have fallen in love with it if it wasn't for that first age of fantasy. I mean, sci-fi has always been around. Horror has always been around, but, movies with, magical elements have always been around. But fantasy kind of peaked like there was this explosion in the 80s of fantasy films, which is kind of, kind of hard to believe because, I mean, let's be honest, they did not have the best special effects, like you just said. It did not have the best budgets, but these people charged ahead and they had to be doubly creative because how else are you going to pull some of these huge scenes and these ideas off? So my first thoughts actually, obviously went to, and I hope I'm not, stepping on anybody's toes. Like we can totally, mention the same things twice, but He-Man, Thundar the Barbarian, those were great. And they all kind of followed in a couple of fantasy tropes, but they threw in other elements. Like there were sci-fi elements, and a lot of people want to say that it was Star Wars that started that because I mean Jedi's are basically space wizards, like I've said a couple of times, and the Force is this kind of amorphous magic. But I think it started with Clash of the Titans, which came out in 1981. All right, like you wouldn't have it in Clash of the Titans, and I mean, it's tough because again, the special effects do not hold up well, and some of the acting also does not hold up well. But as far as just going for it, man, like just going for it, like just giving you these sets and just giving you this scenery and going all the way with the mythology as far as they could, they were ballsy. It was so brave with the limited technology they had to try to actually make this like do this material justice, and I give them credit for that. I give them a lot of credit for that, and I loved it. So I want to talk about two of the most important things to me. Obviously, there's a ton we can talk about. There was Conan, Krull, Highlander, like Willow, like so many things that we can go all day. And I hope you guys touch on it because I'm just going to jump to a couple of things. Because first was Rankin and Bass. Now, Rankin and Bass, they were, you remember the stop motion Christmas barrage that we get every year to this day. And I think everybody refuses to say how bad the animation is, mostly because it's Christmas and you just, I don't know, legally in the United States, you can't really shit talk Christmas. This is just not a thing. But, they made the Christmas film. So Rudolph, Frosty, Santa Claus, Jack Frost. I mean, that almost sounds like the Rankin and Bass Justice League. I feel like there should have been some sort of crossover where all of them just like get together Avengers style and just, I don't know, fuck up the abominable snowman. Like I don't know. There were a lot of them. But they also made a couple of animated movies. Strangely enough, they made The Hobbit and Return of the King. They didn't make Lord of the Rings or the Two Towers. I don't know the story behind that. If anybody knows, please educate us. But Arthur Rankin and Jules Bass decided that they were going to make The Hobbit, which is more in there because that was more of a children's story. So that was more up their alley. And if you saw that when you were a kid, especially when you didn't have cable, this thing was magical. You know what I mean? Because you didn't get the Disney musicals. So this was an animated movie with songs that you got and you were excited about it. And it was only like, I think it's less than an hour long. But as far as hitting the bullet points of the story of The Hobbit, yes, it absolutely holds up. And definitely there are some scenes and some lines that are memorable. Still, in my opinion, a much better interaction with the dragon and Hobbit and Bilbo than in the Hobbit, the Desolation of Smaug. I think it did a much better job in the animated version, my personal opinion. The Return of the King version that they did, it's fine. Again, they kind of tried to do their own thing because they had in this case, it did not work out because it wasn't a children's story. Like, the three books, they were a much larger epic. So they had to stuff a lot more into this hour and 25-minute movie. And they did not hit. They absolutely did not hit. I don't recommend The Return of the King unless you're just morbidly curious. Like, feel free to check it out. But, Ralph Bakshi actually did a Lord of the Rings, and oh my God, it is out there. If you haven't seen Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, do yourself a favor. Do yourself a favor and go and see that. It is an inspiring hot mess, and it will make you feel like you can make an animated film too with enough imagination and like 10 friends. You can do it. You can totally do it. Apart from that, they also made The Last Unicorn. If you haven't seen The Last Unicorn, yeah, it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. I'm a boy. I didn't really want to see The Last Unicorn. Okay, I'm a sexist bastard. I can't help it. I did not want to see The Last Unicorn as a kid. I fought it for the longest time, and then I finally did see it. Oh my god, I fell in love with unicorns. Here I am, little poor Caribbean child, and I want a unicorn now. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. This movie had no right being as good as it was, but it was brilliant. It was a brilliant animated film. It had really good songs by a band called America. And if that isn't the last thing you need to know, like that should be all you need to know right there. But it has a ton of actors, an amazing voice cast, so I definitely recommend it. And as far as the best fantasy film, and I will fight you on this, to come out in this period, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Yes, absolutely. This movie, not only it tells a story inside the film about supposedly the real Baron Munchausen, not liking how he's being portrayed on stage and in stories of that time, but it goes so far out with the special effects and the scenery and just what the scope of this movie for what they tried to do is immense. I would even argue for it to be one of the greatest films of all time. And it's just brilliantly whimsical, but it fits in myths, Roman myths, Greek myths, other European myths. They fit it. They go to the moon. They go to the bottom of the sea. Obviously, paying homage to those themes in fantasy films and novels. They have a symbol of death. Like there's an overarching theme about science and death and technology, and how science is, the enemy of fantasy and imagination. And you're seeing it all through the eyes of this little girl, who is a very young Sarah Pauli, by the way. And you're seeing it all through the eyes of this little girl. And she is just hard to convince at first, but then after a while, she ends up being the thing that keeps Baron Munchausen's Avengers going through this film. Because in the film, the town that they're in is under siege, and so Baron Munchausen has to go get his just randomly superpowered friends to come back and save the town. And through his adventures, he runs into the Moon King, played by Robin Williams, which was absolutely amazing. He finds his friend, who is now elderly, who was supposed to be like the Flash, played by Eric Idle. He runs into Vulcan, played by the amazing Oliver Reed. I love Oliver Reed, one of the best actors ever. And just the entire cast is amazing. The special effects are amazing. Creative. It's not CGI. They had to be creative with how they pulled off a lot of this scenery. And Terry Gilliam and the cinematographers and the special effects crew do an amazing job. This movie bombed. It had a $20 million budget. It ended up costing $46 million, and I think it made less than $10 million when it was released, which for me just makes it, that much more of a reason to go see it. So yes, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, still, I think, my favorite fantasy film. No, I don't think. I know. My favorite fantasy film of that period. Are you muted? Or am I muted? You're muted.
I'm muted. Oh boy, okay. I did that. Hey, it's been on that hiatus. I said we were right on. We were right on.
You can edit that out, right?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll leave it in. It gives spice. It gives texture. It's like like paprika or whatever you want to do, whatever spices up your meal. No, that was a hell of a film, and I found out just recently, I guess, only very loosely based on a real person who I believe he was an Austrian baron or a lord who used to just make up really outlandish stories that everyone knew was outlandish, right?
Well, it's I think in Germany, I think it was an actual series of books.
Yes,
there were other stories about Baron Munchausen, and I think they made a mini series. I think there's a German mini series about Baron Munchausen, but the amount of imagination in this film it's just incredible, and then the imagination to make it is just incredible, and with some other person's money.
Well, and I think it's fun to look back on these things because of, as you said, they had to do so much practical in-camera work.
Yeah.
And the fact is, look, a low budget film nowadays still does look like a low budget film, but it's all relative, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can get away with a lot, you can get away with a lot more on computer, a lot more CGI. Yes, it does still look like lower budget CGI, but there's just a lot more that you can do for less money than you could back then in the 80s.
Yeah.
There just was a lot that you had to put into costumes and a lot into those practical effects. So there was it was truly a labor, right? All the man hours put into putting
yes,
together.
Yeah.
And of love, because you had to really, so there's just something I like about keeping these films alive.
And the scope of it. Like there is a siege on this town. Like there's an army with cannons. Part of it happens underwater. Like they go to the moon and they make it look like the moon. Like the scope of this movie, they did not try to keep it small at all. Like they went all the way to the edge of like this movie. Even with CGI today would cost like $200 million to make.
And therein lies the problem, which unfortunately I think is an undercutting theme that will probably be what we all talk about in the sense of two things. One, I would argue, since actually for Josh, there are low budget movies that still hold up to this day. What it moves into would be the next point I would make in the low budget movies, which is it sort of separated the wheat from the chaff. You had to have an actual skill set for that job to get it done and be working in an environment that was conducive to creative collaboration to get certain things done and a certain risk to take. Back then, the hit to your resume wasn't the same for some of these production guys as is now. They weren't as visual, which also leads to, unfortunately, where real life interrupts art, because the cost of living is such the way it has been ultimately since our lifetime, but really in the increase of the last 20 years, unless you're going to find multiple individuals who can donate so much of their time that it can be cost prohibitive, it's almost impossible to get back to some of those early effects because you just do not have the same environment of the same set of skill set individuals and professionals to pull it off. I will constantly point to people to Star Wars, the first one, completely low budget across the board, still holds up to this day. The only thing they did to screw up that movie was adding effects.
Well, I will, again, we don't rehearse these things, people. I know it's hard to believe. I know when you're listening, you think, God damn, these guys are just, they're working this out. They're working this out hour by hour. When he, when he hit that mute button, he didn't know he was, he knew he was muted. It was just all part of the plan, right? That was just the point where in the script we're supposed to say. But you did that beautifully, setting me up because, I think it goes back to when you're talking about budget, but there's also theme and what's really important to keep in that, and how do you keep the themes that you're trying to do with the budget you have, with what you could do at the time and the constraints of what you can have. And then that's where the love really shows through. I'm going to only briefly touch on this one movie, which is a Star Wars knockoff. I'm, not even going to try and hide it. I'm only going to briefly touch on it because I want to save it for almost an entire episode about a man named Harvey Korman, who is a B filmmaker. And he launched the careers of, he ended up not realizing he was doing it at the time with this movie called Battle Beyond the Stars, who all the effects and a lot of the camera work were done by this little dude named James Cameron. You might have heard of him, that type of thing. Also, the music was done by another man named James Horner.
So it's his fault.
Exactly.
Right.
Another dude you might have heard of. Actually, James Cameron met his first wife working with him. And they were all, like you said, giving up their time and, you know, working on these really crazy hours. And that was his whole thing. It was almost like this amazing movie summer camp. And to tie it back, but this ties back into where I really want to go with that, was using those themes, those underlying themes, and then changing the setting and using your special effects, using all of that to help tell your story. But the story was still really strong, and the themes you were going with were still really strong, which in that particular time, coming out of the 70s and the 80s, I think there was a lot of desire to do that. There was a lot of reason to have to do that because maybe you couldn't do all the things you wanted to do on those effects. So you had to still go with, what is the theme in my story and is it strong? In the aforementioned movie I just mentioned, Battle Beyond the Stars, that is a space remake of the Magnificent Seven, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Bad guys come to a town, good guy has to go out, collects all the other bad guys to help defend against the other bad guys, right? Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, Battle Beyond the Stars, all falls into that. Got to touch briefly on another film that was kind of low budget and showing what sci-fi could do at the time. And this film has a real special place in my heart. This is a Sean Connery film that has Peter Boyle in it, no less. All right. Yeah, exactly. Right. There's a trivia question for you right there. Sean Connery and Peter Boyle, no less, in a remake of High Noon set in outer space called Outland. Entire plot, it's a mining colony run by Peter Boyle. Sean Connery is sent out to be the new marshal. He's the federal marshal in town, sent out because they think he won't cause troubles and he won't make waves. And Peter Boyle is giving the men all kinds of steroids and drugs to make them work harder and mine harder. Unfortunately, it's causing them to have psychotic breaks and throw themselves at airlocks without any spacesuits on. So that gets a little troublesome. And Sean Connery suddenly decides he won't back down and he's going to wait. And so Peter Boyle sends out for some other bad hombres to come in on the stagecoach, which in this case, of course, is the setting of the shuttle coming back in from Earth, right? And it's the same idea, right? High Noon, he's got to stand his ground, and nobody thinks he will, and sure enough, he does. Now, I'm putting that movie in for honorable mention because it goes in with that idea of keeping with the theme, right? We transplanted the idea of the sheriff in the town and we set him in outer space. A little bit of a weak effort when it really comes down to it, but still a worthwhile film to watch. It has a special place in my heart because my father decided to take me to this R-rated film when I was about 6 years old. And we had two guys, one guy ripping his spacesuit and him being splattered all over the inside of his helmet, and another dude deciding to go into an airlock without a spacesuit within the first 10 minutes. And I lasted through that, but I couldn't take it anymore when they are at a brothel and one guy has had a psychotic break and is holding a knife to a prostitute's throat, threatening to kill her. That was enough for 6-year-old me. And I couldn't take it. And I still remember my dad being pissed that he had to leave the movie.
I mean, don't bury the headline. What movie was that?
Pardon that? That was Outland. That was that's the one I'm talking about. This was the scene. It just really has that special place in my heart that I always remember. Jim Fink just being like, God damn it, why can't I take you in anything? Dad. Because at 6 years old, you were really breaking this down for me and what was happening and getting through all the emotional
You're
stuff.
running behind the car on the way home.
Pretty much. That was all that was missing from that scene, right? That when he was holding that knife to his throat and saying, I'll kill the bitch. I mean, he really guided me through that mental image that still, I can still see it to this day. But that brings me to my centerpiece of the day, going and taking those themes and bringing them along, and then setting them in a new fantasy sci-fi epic. And it's a little film from 1985 that often gets forgotten, but I think it was really one of those better works that gets brushed under the rug. And I'm talking about the late great Wolfgang Petersen and his film Enemy Mine, which was just that: low budget, simple, straightforward. In this particular setting, it is a space war between humans and a lizard people known as the Drax, right? And of course, the humans and the Drax don't like each other because, well, you know, we're out in the universe and they lizard like and we human like, and that's just not going to jibe. And it opens up with a dogfight in space. And the main character, played by Dennis Quaid, he's also got a little navigator, and he's like, yeah, he's totally just talking about the themes of it all. He's this fresh-faced, all-American, blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy who's got a date when he gets back from this battle, right? You know, which you know he's not going to make. And of course, he dies when they get shot down. He shoots down the other enemy plane, and on the planet, he being Dennis Quaid, has to run around, and he runs into a Drax, played by none other than Louis Gossett Jr., who had to, endure I don't know how many hours of latex makeup to make himself look like this. But of course, at first they are in a absolute pitched battle with one another, and they're trying to kill each other. And the harshness of their surroundings ends up forcing them to first get along. And then it takes a total twist. And this is, of course, where you go away from the some of the initial themes of the movie. Louis Gossett's character turns out can reproduce asexually and has a baby. And, you know, Dennis Quaid has to help raise said baby, right? So you've got all of these very interesting themes. And where I take that, where I go from is, again, we moved in and we took these themes from another movie called Hell in the Pacific from 1968, which stars Lee Marvin and Toshiro Mifune as a U.S. Marine and a Japanese soldier stranded together on an island who must band together to help each other out, right? So what I really appreciate about this is the effects. Well, they're a little cheesy. They don't entirely hold up, but the story is strong enough to sort of hold that together. And it still makes it a very worthwhile film. It has that themes of like, well, how are we different, but how are we the same, right? Even in pitched battle, even in combat, in the end, survival is gonna be the most important thing to all of us. Doesn't matter what species we are, doesn't matter what color we are. And that is the theme, that is the idea that's going to win out over our individual loyalties. And it really is interesting to me that you could attempt to put these set pieces, or what could be set pieces, right, with all the spaceships and space stations and foreign planets, but yet into it you were forced to weave these really very human and very these story archetypes in there, right? That it was still warfare. It's still really, in the end, two people that didn't necessarily want to fight or wouldn't necessarily, given their own druthers, be in this situation. But here they are. And of course, at first, they're going to go back to their basic nature and defend their flag, defend their planet, defend whatever it is. But when you really get right down to it, how different are they? How much is really going on? And really, what are the mistakes that have made that drove them all to this point? So that one, I was thinking about that this week, just reading about Wolfgang. Of course, we were talking about this before we started, and my phone's always listening, so it comes up in my feed, no less, because
Nice.
That's the age we live in now. AI is already starting to anticipate our every move. But there was, as we were talking about, there was these labors of love that you had to put in the time, you had to put in all the effects, you had to work really hard for it, but there was still a commitment to the idea of storytelling with some of these knockoffs. Some of them were just trying to jump on the train. Some were just trying to be like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or whatever fantasy franchise, even though that wasn't really a term back then, they could rip off. But I really appreciated, thinking about and looking back on these little gems in there, and to really look back at our history and where these movies could really still tell a story.
I think you touched on that. I mean, I think in yours, what I'm feeling is like I don't know, where is that line between fantasy and sci-fi? Because for me, those are like more like sci-fi choices.
Yep.
But you know, the line between fantasy and sci-fi, we talked about Star Wars, He-Man, you know, like they have you know, lasers, but they also have dragons. So yeah, like where does the sci-fi start and the fantasy begin?
Well, by definition, to get to sci-fi, you must have fantasy.
Right, that's the fiction part of the. Yeah, there's always some degree. It's how far you push it, right? I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
I have a huge love for Star Wars, but that is, you know, space. The people who call them space wizards.
Don't get me wrong. I'm pretty sure if you
Space
told
wizards.
someone that if they were going to a sci-fi, especially a space sci-fi, whatchamacallit, wow, I can't even think. I'm so caught up in what I want to say. When you have a string
Space
of movies.
opera?
No, when you have
a franchise, a series.
like a festival.
Yeah, festival. I'll get it. Festival.
And then you basically run Conan and movies like that. You're probably gonna have some upset people. So I'm not trying to act as if there's not a delineation. What I would point out though is that you gotta be real careful where that delineation comes in, considering that you cannot have sci-fi without fantasy. That is literally the element of the fiction.
Well, I didn't even get into Tor, the Hunter from the Future. That little.
But I love that you brought up Enemy Mine, because I remember watching it as a kid, and at first it was hard to like it because the racial undertones were so strong, and I knew exactly who the alien was. So it was hard. It was hard for me as a kid. I think the first time I saw it, I was 7 or something. It was hard for me to separate it. But after a while, I was like, I would argue it's going to lead to one of the points I'm going to make, which was they knew pretty much where to bail out on the special effects to make the actual story, which was pretty strong and albeit sure an homage to a previous story, as many stories are, frankly. But yes, they basically knew where to ride the line, even with like some of the invasive species of the planet. It's like they're because it got a little kooky, but not that much more kooky in Star Trek 2 that came out right around the same time.
Yeah, it was definitely in that same vein. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think there was something to it. It's a funny thing that I've watched special effects even in my own lifetime. I worked in post production for a brief period of time in LA, and you know it was the beginning of digital editing. And the beginning of even the idea of removable hard drives, which at that time were, I don't know, they were like a 5x5 cube. And it was a big deal to have those. And they cost thousands of dollars, like about $5,000 a piece. So you have that, and all that, what's happened since then? All of that's gotten smaller, cheaper. Everything I've just described can be on a thumb drive. I could do most of what we were doing at that time on this very computer that I'm speaking to you on. My phone could handle half of it. All of it's come cheaper, easier. And there was something to that day and age when you're talking about, Greg talking about Adventures of Baron Munchausen, myself moving on to Enemy Mine. It was something about, working within those limitations, produce some kind of interesting and lovely stuff that you couldn't just go out and make anything you wanted, and you couldn't just produce it in the digital world. You had to actually figure out what you were doing and what you could afford, what you couldn't afford, and where you were trying to use it to enhance your story. So it won't happen again. And I'm not saying we should turn back by any extent, but I just think I really still enjoy looking back on those films and seeing where, as you say, RaShaun, where they had to ride that line with the special effects, right? Like just knew how much to do it, to enhance it, and then bring it back to the story. But
I actually prefer to go. I think it would be a good idea to go back to that. The problem is we would have to pay for it. I think that's the difference, right? Yeah. Like to get those individuals that think about this is like, don't start the timer. I just want to real quick point this out because I think what we often as consumers don't talk about enough were the crass people involved in a lot of these films from like let's say early 90s and back. These individuals you couldn't get the same group of people for the amount of money that you did for probably half the film in the same room. Like the skill set that these individuals have, you couldn't get those same amount of people on one movie to not make it cost prohibitive these days. Because there's such a dearth of talent in that way, because there's such reliance on technology and increases that it'd be, I would argue, tangibly near improbable to have that sort of group able to even do that sort of thing. So you would have to push for the new generations to go back to the analog sort of ways to at least rely on it before they move on to crutches like CGI, which in its place obviously do great things, but we know what happens when they're not.
Yeah, it's one of those things where everything comes back around, because there are definitely cults of people who still practice every kind of old school animation special effect that you could possibly think of. But in order to get their process up to where it needs to be to make a feature length film, would still end up costing a fortune. Like, like it would be, it would not be cost effective. I mean, even if you take the most common thing, which was stop motion, stop motion, unbelievably tedious, unbelievably expensive.
Did it as a kid. Oh man.
Yeah. I mean, you could, but there are lots of people who still practice it. But good luck trying to make a full length film out of that.
Well,
yeah. And Star Child, I'm with you on the animation of The Hobbit. That was my fucking jam growing up. I had Disney, but I was in such a dire need of different animation. So when I saw The Hobbit, that hit like fucking crack, man. I was just like, I was in. Wasn't in for the singing. Not gonna lie. That I once I taped it.
Greatest adventure is
once I taped it. That's right, kids. I said taped. I didn't stutter. I didn't mess up. I didn't have a stroke. Once I taped it, I definitely fast forward through that part. But like the animation, oh fuck yeah, I was all in for that. I'm totally with you on that. Every point you made on The Hobbit.
Well, with that, RaShaun, the three clubs, let's take us back in the way back machine for your 10 minutes and talk about your golden age. What excited your imagination when you were but a young lad?
Once again, I'm distracted because I'm looking at these individuals and goddamn, I missed them. All right, so here we go. A couple years back, my beautiful wife gave me a fantastic birthday gift amongst many awesome birthday gifts that she's given me since I've known her for coming up on 20 years, which was she took me to a play. And the play was Night of the Iguana. And it was in this playhouse in Cambridge. And the point being is that it was a straightforward play. I mean, the actors were pretty good. Some I would argue like, probably going to see that guy blow up or that person blow up pretty soon. Others are like, all right, hey, you're doing good for probably the level you're going to get to. That's not the point. The point is the scenery, the backdrop, the setting. It was so beautiful. It was so like immaculately done. They weren't trying to make me think that I was literally looking at, I think it takes place in Argentina. I could be wrong, but they weren't trying to make me believe I was looking at a photorealistic thing. No, they just created a beautiful backdrop that was so immersive in their skill set of being able to do it that it brought me into the scenery so deep, so well that it felt like I was like, it almost became an immersive situation. It was in some ways, I would argue, almost more powerful than movies. And that is where I think a lot of movies don't, either they fall down or they don't understand, they don't appreciate, or to be fair, frankly, they're chasing after the almighty dollar. And let's be honest, people out there, it's an industry, it's careers, people got to pay for things. I'm not trying to knock people for making a dollar. I'm just pointing out this is why you fucked up. So look at it a different way. So I think it was True Detective season 2. There's a really fucked up scene where it was a giant shootout. One detective is following another. Like, one detective doesn't really have much of a chance in the shootout because like a lot of people are dying. And this detective isn't one of the main characters. And it's like middle of the season. And even though True Detective had no problem fucking with main characters in the timeline and all that, blah, blah, blah. Still, they're like, yeah, all right, well, the second detective is definitely the red shirt in the situation. Well, yeah, the first detective, one of the main characters, moves decisively, goes right to where it needs to be, and not sitting there trying to make a discussion, have a discussion. She's in the middle of a shootout. The second detective decides that he wants to have a discussion, but he stutters and then decides that he wants to follow that detective because he doesn't know what else to do, and that's the best option he has. And he immediately gets his head shot off. I know, pretty graphic, but kind of a similar thing happens in the movie Heat, which there's some talk about Heat 2 coming around, which I have weird feelings about that. I know it has nothing to do with the subject that we're talking about, but I did get there. But there was a similar scene where also in a shootout, a cop follows another cop, and because he's undecisive, gets fucking nailed. Now, RaShaun, why are you bringing shit up like that? Well, because the 80s were literally that. If you broke down the blockbusters, and what I mean by blockbusters, because again, it's an industry, so people, studios, were trying to make money, regardless of how we felt about the movie people, regardless of the intimate connections that we had, regardless of what we thought it made us feel or what we thought they were trying to say. There was someone behind it looking at like a spreadsheet and saying, am I going to make money or not? Are the people that I represent going to make money or not? I know I'm fucking with the whole vibe, but I'm just pointing out how we actually end up making more decisions than we think. So a lot of movies, yeah, it kind of came down to that. But what they were also trying to do were chase, if we're going to talk about fantasy, and yeah, I did fuck up the assignment a little bit. I was squarely in the sci-fi side, but I am being honest in the sense of pointing out you can't get science fiction without the fiction. Fiction, another or a synonymous word for is fantasy. It's made up. It's make-believe. It's imagination. Anyway, that's obviously going to be a tangent. So what these guys, a lot of the movies in the 80s end up trying to do where they're basically chasing the blockbuster movies. And oh, guess what? Guess what the top 3 grossing movies of the 80s were? It was E.T., Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Star Wars, Return of the Jedi. To this day, top grossing movies in the 80s. So it would make sense that a lot of studios just cranked out as much materials as they could that fell into these buckets, which was basically, it was either kind of like Star Wars, which we brought up, the Battle Beyond the Stars. Thank you very much. I can also argue Still Dawn kind of fell into that. I can argue that even though it came out before Empire Strikes Back, Flash Gordon totally got fucked up because of that. I can argue that the example of the detective getting his head shot off because it moved way too slow in this direction and had no business going that direction and probably should have just found a different way of going about it was the aforementioned David Lynch's 1984 The Dune. I've gone on record and I actually say even now with the one that just got remade, which was pretty good. I had to eat some crow on that, but I still say 1984 The Dune would have been better if it literally just was played like an actual play, like Night of the Iguana that I went to for a couple of birthdays back. If they literally just put backdrops up, use the same actors, I don't give a shit, and literally had them stand in front of backdrops and just said the same lines and just use what you can do in the play, it would have been so much better of a movie. It would have been mind-blowingly better. That's how bad that movie was. And it was that bad because when you're watching it and you know the history of all these movies and you've been a big fan of, let's say, a franchise, I don't know, maybe one that kind of propelled Disney into having a fucking Megalomaniac type of app that's controlling half the world and it has a plus next to it. Maybe some franchise like that. When you're trying to chase that, you're inevitable to fail. You have no business to succeed. You will get your head shot off. And literally the example of that and all that fell after it. Because weirdly enough, I actually kind of include Kroll into that. A lot of people say, well, actually, Conan, yeah, I get what you're saying. But did you actually watch Kroll? Did you watch it? Did you watch the fucking bad guys? Because, yeah, they're kind of saying we're the medieval Star Wars. But the whole point is because they did nothing but chase after Star Wars and did nothing but try to carbon copy, they became fucking awful. E.T. fell into the same category too. Daryl, Project X, Starman, all basically about explorers needing to go home. The ones I talked about that are chasing Star Wars, explorers trying to go away from home. Like they literally just slapped Star Wars aesthetics on it and really fucked up. So where does this lead us? Oh, and don't worry, because Aliens, Terminator, Predator, they also had their weird spawns too. Alien's probably the most successful, and I know you may be thinking, well, actually, RaShaun, the franchise starts with Alien. Yeah, I got that, but Alien is the one that's actually kicked off the fucking little franchise, the little offshoot of Worlds. That's where you got your little Leviathan, your Deep Star 6, and one of my actual favorites, and took a totally different direction. And part of the reason why I love this movie so much, and the reason why I will watch it to this day, no matter what part of the movie it's on, The Abyss. Fuck yeah, I still kiss my ring because of Ed Harris. I have no fucking reason. My ring, my finger wasn't caught in a hydraulic fucking door. It didn't save my life. I wasn't 30 leagues underneath the goddamn sea. And for damn sure don't have a wife that I'm gonna have to fucking pull out of the goddamn ocean because she decided to fucking be too stubborn and get drowned. I'm in none of those situations, but I still kiss my ring because of The Abyss. So why? Because The Abyss decided to be a little original. And then we also talked about a lot of the other movies that were super original too, that frankly are some of my favorite movies. And I would argue some of my gentlemen, it would fall on the list too. The Explorers, Time Bandit. We already talked about Clash of the Titans. They decided to go on their own way. Enemy Mine, definitely on my list. The Last Starfire. I will fucking rock all goddamn day long on some Last Starfire. That shit was it. Like Inner Space. Dennis Quaid was on some shit back in the 80s when it came to sci-fi. Like that dude was here he was like basically Chris Pine now. Chris Pine's coming for all your sci-fi right now. If you got something that's sci-fi, something fancy, and you love it, best believe you better like Chris Pine because he's coming for it. And Dennis Quaid was that dude back in the fucking 80s. And then also something that actually doesn't get talked about as far as his originality because of its premise, but I would argue some of the most original content that came out of the 80s, movies like Ice Pirates and Spaceballs, spoofs of the big movies, but they took so many weird shots that they became its own entity in such a creative, powerful, original way. They deserve to be stood to stand on their own. But yeah, if I had to answer the question about fantasy movie, like we're swinging swords and there's dragons and magic, and that's all we get, and it's not like robots and flying in space, RaShaun. Yeah, I got it. I'm the Three of Clubs. I'm here to fuck up your deck. I would go to, if you're gonna give me a movie, I want to see Helen Mirren. I want to see fucking I Will Kill Every N-Word out there in Glasgow, Liam Neeson. I want to see Sir Patrick fucking Stewart. I want to see Excalibur.
Woo. Well, it had been a little while, but you know, the Three of Clubs went right up to that block with the question mark on it and hit that, and that mushroom came down, and then he hit another one. And that star got going. He was just, yeah.
I would like to give a shout out to The Labyrinth, The Highlander, Legend, and also Never Ending Story. Never Ending Story. I mean, that shit.
All I'm gonna say
makes me comfy just thinking about it.
I just had a couple of my thoughts. I'll keep my thoughts brief and then we'll move on. One, that you started putting the in front of everything like my grandfather. So you had the Dune, you had the Highlander, everything.
Well,
everything in front of there.
Just it is Highlander.
Yeah. Just like my granddad. And two, when you were talking about, your production of Night of the Iguana and then talking about like a stage production of Dune, I was thinking of it like done in Rushmore, right? In the movie Rushmore, when he's doing these really complicated stage productions of Serpico, and right, and that's really what I had in my head. I thought of young RaShaun out in Framingham, putting on really complicated stage productions of Dune, right, with these giant worms that would like come out of the background.
I tried, but the problem is I'm more a director and a producer, and that's not really cool when you're trying to get your friends to like build shit.
Yeah. That's how you lose friends.
You guys had a sleepover last weekend? Right behind me.
Let's not talk about that. That's still a tender subject for me. But well, that you hit on them all there, my friend. I don't know if there were any movies in the 80s that in this particular age of a lot of analog effects that you left out. I forgot all about Leviathan and Deep Star 6, which came out like a week after each other, by the way.
Yeah, and it was pretty fun. We should definitely do an episode on how those two were released and what they're after, because they are connected. I did leave out the Beastmaster. It is called the Beastmaster.
It is the Beastmaster. You're not being my grandfather on that one. Yes.
Lady Hawk, Dragon Slayer. I'm just going with like the top ones.
The Lady Hawk
popped up, and those are just. I did not want. I sincerely wanted to stick to stuff that people would probably readily know. I know I kind of got out there with Time Bandits, but like I was trying to stick to the classics, people. I wasn't trying to play you the B-sides at the concert. I wasn't trying to play some new material or anything like that. I was trying to go right to taking care of business.
Well, we're back to it. We're back to it, and we're our own Homer Simpson standing out there in the audience yelling, "Taking care of business." Oh, but if you're gonna take care of business, by the way, since you're here and you've lasted this long in the show, please head on over to the socials and like us on the Facebook. And the Instagram.
Birdman almost sticking that landing. You stumbled a little bit. That was a little step back, but for the most part, the knees bent perfectly. You're doing great.
I've had much worse landings than that. Let's be honest. Like this one's almost passable. I kind of had to stumble step forward and got it back together, but
still on your feet.
Head on over definitely to socials. Like us. There we go. Like us on Facebook, on Instagram. We are out there on Twitter. And TikTok allegedly. We're out there. We exist. I mean, just most importantly, though, Apple, go over to iTunes, rate and review us, or Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, any places that review. Help us, help us trick that algorithm, into getting us, some really solid mattress and dick bill money, because that's what life's all about, is mattress and dick bill money. I'm just saying.
Hashtag dick pills.
Hashtag dick pills, man.
I'm not sure why a mattress maker hasn't taken the initiative and made their own dick pills. I mean,
yeah, you would make a certain amount of sense, but
then again, Anheuser-Busch is leading the way with condoms.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
Probably because after 25, the majority of their drinkers ain't getting it up after one or two of those.
I'm just saying, as we were talking about earlier this week, that punk rock is in fact not dead, but it is balding and goes to bed at a much more reasonable hour now. So
it's got the hemorrhoids.
That's definitely where we're at. Well, speaking of getting to bed at a more reasonable hour, now I'm talking to myself, but RaShaun, 3 of Clubs, tell us what you think you got going on for the rest of the day, week, month, year, as we're heading on back out in this episode.
Yeah, no, cover what I have for the rest of the year in about a 10-second lead out.
Sure. Come on, you can do it.
Thank you for thinking so well of my life. I did not even cover what I would call the gritty arc that happened around 1987 in the robocopification of sci-fi movies, but I left that out also because I fucked up the homework assignment and totally came prepared with a history lesson for math work.
Yay. All right. Well, yes, the robocopification. That's a mouthful. I'm not gonna lie.
You gotta say it a few times for it to roll off your tongue. Coming from the guy who has literally nothing rolling off his tongue. Everything is just like a cheese block sliding off. It's like, you're not sure. Oh, yeah, that's what he said.
Robocopification.
Robocopification.
That was a little like a Biden speech. I'm not going to lie. It was like we were there, and then we had robocopification. All right.
I wish he was that articulate.
That'll stick with it. All right. It's all good. Star Child, where are you going? What realms of fantasy are you going to for the rest of the week?
Well, I'm gonna do same thing RaShaun did, because I tried not to, but I didn't want to step on anybody else's toes, because I didn't want to mention a couple of movies that I thought everybody else was gonna get to. But a lot of love for Masters of the Universe, the live action one. It's nothing like He-Man, but you don't care. A lot of love. You don't care. It's absolutely fantastic. And obviously, it's got Big Trouble in Little China. Make sure you put Big Trouble in Little China on the permanent reporting.
Always. But that to me is like that's a cut above.
Yeah. And
that's something different entirely.
And just between
it's
me
like saying
and
Tombstone.
Yeah, exactly.
And just between me and the listeners, not these fake motherfuckers over here.
Oh,
But the golden child.
Oh!
Yeah.
Oh!
Yeah, neither of these two. Neither of these two.
Oh!
These motherfuckers are over here with hydraulic accelerators and black holes and shit. And nah, man, we're over here in fantasy with my listeners who are going to read the title and they're going to be waiting for it. So somebody's got to say it. The Golden Child with Eddie Murphy and Charles Dance. Don't forget that.
I want the land.
I want the dagger.
I want the land. I want the land.
I want the dagger.
Knife.
Want the knife. Oh,
Please.
man.
It's your brother Nipsey.
An entire hour plus and not one scratch.
Not one of these motherfuckers said the Golden Child, but that's all right. That's all right.
I'm gonna take a shot. It's probably not gonna land. I'm gonna take a shot. It's up there with Big Trouble in Little China. Like it's the name that does not need to be said. It is in the pantheon of love.
I mean, so that's why you didn't say it.
Yeah.
Did that work in school? Did
to
that
be
work
fair,
in school?
all right.
When the teacher was asking for answers,
to be fair, if we're gonna go down that road, then Noah
doesn't
brought
need
up
to
The
be
Last
said.
Dragon. I mean, Noah brought up The Last Dragon.
We didn't say about the no. Well, we would, we got subgenre upon subgenre. But all right, Greg, you brought us up short, and we deserve to. The fact that you were the one who gave the honorary shout out to the Golden Child.
Kind of cheap.
Yeah, it's
It's kind of cheap.
That one
Hurts, but cheap.
That occupies a space unto itself.
The listeners are waiting to hear it. That's all that matters. The listeners are waiting to hear it. I give the people what they want. You know what I'm saying? I give the people. I give it to the people.
I give it to the people. ODB is for ODB is for the children. That's what we know here. ODB is for the children. All right. Well, I'm gonna just do my best to keep on keeping on. I gotta run a child soccer practice on Wednesday, so God help me. I know I run exercise classes all the time, but I'm far more intimidated by this. So
it's Monday, listeners. Just in case, whenever you're listening to this, while he's talking about Wednesday, it's Monday.
It could be any Wednesday. Like that's the thing. It's
True.
an archetype.
It could be any Monday.
It could be any given Wednesday.
Monday before the Wednesday.
Who knows? As long as you know it's out there. So yeah, I got my sights on that. I guess I'm gonna have to go watch The Golden Child again now. God damn it.
You're welcome.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Very cool.
I was never really quite sure what Eddie Murphy wanted out of that particular project, and I know he fought for it. I gotta go read up on it now, man.
He wanted to make an awesome movie, and he succeeded.
There you go. And now I'm going down the Wikipedia. I'm gonna go down the Wikipedia rabbit hole on how that.
That's my goal with every episode. My work here is done.
Thank you. All right, Greg. Well, you did succeed. All right.
My work here is done.
Dirty.
Well, my work
here is done.
We are so glad to be back. We are so glad to be with you. Thank you all again for joining us. And until next time, this is Josh the Birdman saying to keep your heat up and keep your head of steam on.
That's dirty, like putting Arnold Schwarzenegger in Red Sonja, but not calling him Conan. That's dirty like that.
No, man.